Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where it is time to build another spooky structure for Gruesome Gulch. In the final mad dash to finish as much as I could of Gruesome Gulch last year, I ran out of time on things like the saloon project. The Dead Eye Saloon, I had big plans for this, but ended up only having time to build a mock-up to act as a placeholder. I've had a little time to think about the project now, and I've decided that what I want to do first is just build this facade, just the front of the building, and then I'll figure out the rest of the structure from there. And with that in mind, I've cut some laser cut parts. This is the front of the building, obviously, out of some 1/16 of an inch thick basswood plywood. And this is the back of the facade, right there, goes up there. And then I've got the beginnings of an MDF core for extra strength and to thicken the walls out to a scale 6 inches thick. And then some 25,000th of an inch thick laser board for the windows and the saloon doors and the trim and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing I think I want to do is distress and stain these wooden parts, and then we can start putting this together. On the mock-up, I gave it sort of a dark red-brown paint job, but the look I really think I want for this is almost, bare, old weathered wood. Like if you've been out to like Bodie Ghost Town or Calico in San Bernardino, you see the buildings, they have this wonderful patina, and the way I think I'm going to achieve that is it's going to be a two-step process. First, I'm going to go over everything with some Minwax Early American, just to give it that brown tone. And then the next step is going to be to go over everything with my usual India ink and rubbing alcohol stain. Oh yeah, I like that. This is actually supposed to be board and batten siding with 8-inch boards and 1x2 battens. So I've cut a bunch of O-scale 1x2 to approximate length, and I'm giving them the same treatment that I gave the walls. I believe these plywood pieces are dry enough. I can do a little assembly now. The first thing I want to do is attach the back of the false front to the false front. These soft-jawed mini clamps, by the way, are available from Micromark. And these ultra fancy clamps are available from your local discount store. Now I can glue the MDF core on, and that should key right up under there and with the door and window openings. While I wait for all this other stuff to dry, I'm starting to do some assembly on the doors and windows. These have some layered parts to give them a more three-dimensional look. There's a couple of little panels. I'm giving myself some etched lines to help me line this up. I also want to start to build up the fancy cornice pieces. This gets a little strip of 1x2 across here. Decided the paint scheme on my mock-up is just a little bit too bright and cheery for Gruesome Gulch. So on the real one, I'm going to paint the trim sort of a blood red, almost like an ox blood. And one of the best matches I found for that is a color called Chocolate Bar from Apple Barrel, and it actually looks nothing like chocolate, but it is a really nice dark mineral brown. I also want to go around and paint the interior edge of all the door and window frames with that same dark red. I want the saloon doors to really pop, and stand out, so I'm making them a lighter contrasting shade. This is just some khaki. I can put the other parts of the cornice on. I usually like to put the glazing in the windows before I install the windows in the structure. And in the case of Gruesome Gulch, that also means breaking a lot of the windows. I'm using some thin clear acrylic, and now I'm just going around with my a sharp blade and my hobby knife and cutting out broken bits here and there. Sometimes I just want a little crack in the glass. Sometimes I want to take pieces out. Now I'll just apply some Zap canopy glue. And we can glue it right on the top. If you want to put a bullet hole in the glass, which I do right here, first I'm going to drill a hole. There's a hole in there. Now I'm going to take and add some radial lines coming off of it. Like a little sunburst in all directions. One bullet hole. Get the trim on here, outer casement. On these double hung style windows, I find it's a lot easier to put the outer casement on first, then flip the whole thing over. And then you can just drop the inner casement in like that. Put the big front windows in now. The last part of the window is the sill. Now for the butterfly saloon doors, I actually want to have one of them kind of hanging half off like it's broken. I'll cut through that little tab right there, like the hinge is broken. Yeah. Then I'll CA this to the back of the other door. Now I can just glue this into the opening. And now I can finish gluing in all of those battens, one by two at a time. I'm continuing to build up the trim and the cornice. Got some lumber from my scrap box here. Put in a couple of 1/16 of an inch thick pieces. So this is basically a 12 by 3. And then I'm going to cap off the top here. Got a piece of 1/32 of an inch thick basswood, and I'll cut a couple more for those sides. I've also added a little bit of trim to the sides here. This is just some scale 1/6 to finish off the sides where they're going to show. Dry brush on a little bit of just granite gray and some beige. All the window and door frames too. The last thing on the facade here, for now anyway, is I want to do some weathering on the insides of the windows, make them look dirty and grimy. And so I'm going to spray some acrylic matte finish on the back of the glazing, and that'll give it a little bit of tooth, so it'll hold the colored chalks that I'm going to use to weather them with. And heavier around towards the sides and the corners than in the middle. Alright, I think that's good enough. Now I'll just get another coat of clear acrylic on that. I'm just going over all this trim one more time with my black India ink and alcohol wash. Dark wash is always great for given age. Really want to get into the details here on these saloon doors. That's looking downright sinister now. I love it. There's an effect I want to put inside of the saloon. Basically, I want to have a ghost appear and kind of drift by the front doors and then disappear. So what I came up with to achieve this is basically it's going to be a rotating drum that goes around this way using a low RPM DC motor. This one is, I think, 3 RPM, so very slow. It'll slowly rotate around, and there'll be a light inside of this drum. But the only place for the light to escape is through the silhouette of a ghost. The rest of it's solid. And so when it rotates into view, it looks like the ghost appears, and then it rotates back out of view again, and the ghost disappears. That's the theory anyway. The hard part is making all that work inside a little 1/48 scale building. And here you see the top and the bottom of the rotating drum. Some other pieces. This is the bracket that the motor will be mounted on. The floor, walls, roof trusses, etc., various structural pieces. But before I do any assembly, I need to paint everything theatrical flat black, so it just eats up light. I don't want any light reflecting from inside of this box. It's going to be basically a black box. The interior is basically going to be made up of 3 sub-assemblies. You've got the black box that I just finished gluing up. Then you've got the attic, which is going to hold the electric motor. And then you have the actual rotating drum, which will attach down below here. This is some 1/16 of an inch thick MDF. That's what I cut all of these pieces out of. It's kind of my go-to for structural pieces, structural parts like this. Before I assemble all this, I want to test this little motor one more time, make sure it works. Using a 9-volt battery. It's rotating very, very slowly, but it is rotating. Now I'm just going to use a couple of machine screws to hold the motor in place. Now these tabs go into these slots, and these tabs go into these slots. Now I've got a ridge pole that should lock all this together. A little eave bracket on each side for the rafters. Now this attic assembly should just fit over these tabs and slots in the walls. I'm not going to glue these because I want the entire roof to remain removable, but that keys it in. Naturally, I don't want the motor to be visible through the upstairs window. Just got a piece of illustration board that I've painted black, and that should block the view from every direction that matters. Just soldering some leads onto the motor now. Keep the wires tidy in here. I'm using some double stick foam tape. This is the industrial strength stuff. And it's a good idea to put another piece of tape over the top of that. Where the wires run down through the building, just going to use some black heat shrink so they'll disappear. And solder this in to the mini plug. Now when this is installed on the layout, this end will go down through the scenery and get plugged into this end, the female end, and this will be connected to the layout's 9-volt DC wiring bus for lighting and animation. So we've got our little black box theater, and we've got our attic piece with the motor installed. And now, working on the third part of this magic trick, and that is the rotating drum. So this is the bottom of the drum where the light bulb will come up inside, and the top has a little slotted hole that keys to the drive shaft on the motor. Just going to go around and put a bead of CA on all of these joints. Now this fine fellow, if you can see him there, is Dead Eye Dan. And he is the resident ghost of the Dead Eye Saloon. And this is going to get glued onto the drum like so. Wrap all the way around. Right? But there's one thing I have to do before I put him on, and that is add a light diffuser inside. So I've got a piece of clear acrylic. I've got some 400 grit sandpaper, which should work nicely. Just want to sand the whole thing completely using kind of a rotary motion here, rotating motion, so we get a nice, even, fogged appearance. I'm just going to glue it in with a little bit of canopy glue on the ends. Into that corner, and then right into that corner. Using some Eileen's tacky glue here, because I want a quick grab on this next part as I attach Dead Eye Dan to his revolving Ghostorama of Doom. Still trying to come up with a good name for this. Now I can take some black paint and a very tiny 00 brush and add some features to Dan. Black dots for eyes, maybe a gaping mouth. Now, the last thing to add to this Ghostorama that's really going to make the whole thing work is something you may not expect. These are some black nylon pantyhose. And this goes over the outside of the drum to further diffuse the light coming out of the silhouette of the ghost. Look, he disappeared. Now I want to stretch the nylon tight across the drum and then glue it into place. It can be a little tricky to do. So I'm putting down some double stick tape first. And now while the tape holds it, I can glue it down all the way around with some cyanoacrylate. And once the CA is set up, go back and cut off any excess cloth. Now I can attach the Ghostorama to the motor. It's just a press fit on the shaft. Just like that. To illuminate my ghost, I've wired a white LED and a blue LED together. The white one is really for the illumination, and the blue one is just to add a spooky atmosphere. Now, let's do a quick test. I love it when a plan comes together. With the mechanical problem solved, now I can go ahead and finish the model. I've cut and stained some pieces for the sides and the back wall, some exterior wall pieces. Only gluing to the bottom half of the wall, not to the top half, so the roof, that whole section will remain removable, just in case. The upper half of the back wall. Got this side. And the lower half of the back wall. Now I can go ahead and glue the facade on. Once again, only to the side walls and the base, and not to the attic. Cut some Victorian style eave brackets, and I'm going to use those to support the porch roof, which will go right over the top like that. I'm also finishing up the last of the board and batten siding on the sides and the back by gluing on these 1x2s one by one. I'm using some 3x6 stock to model the remaining rafters. I was thinking I might just have rafter tails, but it always makes for a stronger structure to have full rafters in there. And if I need to replace the motor, I have to take this whole thing out anyway. Might as well put the rafters in. Now I can put the roof panels on. And this is just some 30 thou chipboard that I etched some lines in to help me put shingles on. On the porch roof, I've added some 3x6 rafters. I've also cut away a section to make a hole in the roof. Give it that haunted look. For roofing, I'm using some Bar Mills laser cut paper shingles. These are the dark brown ones. And the way I like to apply them is just to put glue along the top edge. And that way, later I can go back and lift a shingle here and there to give it a rustic look. These have a really nice rustic cut pattern to begin with, which is really perfect for this project. I want to have a stovepipe coming out over on this side of the roof. So I've made some flashing. This is some black cinefoil. This is the same stuff that I used on the Bandit Canyon Railway Blackjack Mine project to do the corrugated metal roofing. Well, it also makes excellent flashing. What really sells it, of course, is to have the shingles overlapping the flashing on the sides and the top like that. To do the cap shingles on a false front building like this, I like to start from the back end, work your way up towards the front. Usually just take and cut off a pair of shingles like this. Oops, and fold it over. And put some glue inside the fold. And on it goes. Just go right down the line until you get them all. Things like this hole in the roof, I like to cut out a few individual shingles and just have them hanging there on the slats like they could fall off at any minute. The smoke jack is a white metal casting from Wiseman Model Services. Built up a foundation for the structure out of some O-scale 6x12s. And that's also going to provide me with a framework for the board sidewalk, which I'm going to be adding next. But first, I want to glue this guy onto this frame. And this will lift the structure up to the height that I want it to be on the layout relative to the other structures. The boardwalk in this part of town is pretty narrow, only about 4 feet deep. And I'm modeling it with some coffee stir sticks that I've already cut and stained and just got done adding nail holes to with my pin vise. Once again, it's a ghost town, so some of these boards should be broken. And this is supposed to be an abandoned building, so I'll put a couple of boards that were hastily nailed on across the doorway here to keep curious people out, or perhaps to keep something in. Also, as a bonus, these boards down at the bottom block the view of the base of the Ghostorama, the drum. I want to put a couple across the windows too. Now we come to one of my favorite parts of these projects, and that's the graphics, the signs. I just coated the back of this with some Super 77 spray adhesive. I'm laminating it to some Bristol board to make it a little bit thicker. And these are just graphics that I created in Adobe Photoshop for the saloon. Now we take a sharp hobby knife and cut through both layers and cut these out. Now I want to use my watercolors and paint the backs and the edges of these signs kind of a warm dark gray to match the rest of the structure. Now I want to trim out the main sign with some O-scale 2x4 that I've painted the same kind of red-brown trim color. So to mount the sign, I've installed a couple of short pieces of music wire in the back, and those mate with 2 holes I just drilled in the front of the building. Just put a little CA on these, a little bit of wood glue on the bottom, line up the holes. That should hold it in place nicely. And the smaller sign I want to have attached to the porch awning. Rounding things off, I've added a few vintage looking liquor advertisements. Over here we've got pick your poison, and here we've got Dread Pirate rum, the finest rum in Florin. If you know, you know. And down here, my particular favorite, you can see that, Rot Gut Whiskey and Balmer and Company, San Francisco. I like to reward people that look closely. And the last detail for the front porch is this fine fellow. He's a skeleton from Mini Prints. You can find a link to them over on my website, thundermesa.studio. And he's holding a bottle of Puerto Borracho's finest tequila in Gary Beatty's honor. And the last thing is to add some more weathering to this roofing and these signs with my colored chalks. Dull these signs down a little bit. Make the roof look a little bit more old and worn out. Now just get a light coat of acrylic matte finish on there, and I think we can plug it into the layout. Alright, I've got my LEDs already installed in the layout. Just come up from underneath. Now I just need to plug this into here. Thread that back down underneath. Now if I measured everything right, it should fit right over the top of that. Just like that. There we go. Alright. The final test. Fingers crossed while I switch it on. And that's going to do it for the Dead Eye Saloon project. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to thank everyone who supports this channel by liking, subscribing, sharing, becoming a patron on Patreon, buying merchandise on the Thunder Mesa Studio website. I appreciate all of you very much. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.